Good to go? Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here tonight. It's my pleasure to be able to bring the Word of God to you tonight. Today's passage is going to be Joshua 1. So Joshua 1, chapter 1, we will be going through the whole entire chapter. And I want us to think about something, and that's fear, right? Everybody knows the great quote, we have nothing to fear but fear itself, by Dwight E. Eisenhower. We also see that fear, with the latest neuroscience research, that fear is an embodied emotion that's been wired into us by God. It's something that we feel all the time and that we were designed to feel. It's natural for us to feel it. But as you and I both know, fear can be extremely crippling when we come upon situations that invoke that emotion in us. We have that flight, fight, response, or freeze response wired inside of us. And most of us have one of those that we go to more often when we experience fear. But how does God want us to respond to fear? Today's narrative, and we see in Joshua 1, we see a story of how God wants us to deal with fear. But in order to understand this passage, we have to really look at some context here of what opens up the book of Joshua, what brings us to that. And we get a hint in the first couple of words here, like after the death of Moses. Right? Moses, the leader of the nation of Israel, the nation that's been wandering around the desert after being in slavery in Egypt, is dead. He's no longer the leader. So this entire nation of just nomads doesn't have a leader anymore. What are they going to do? And so they're in the process of grieving, but they're in the process of waiting too, because they're encamped on the outskirts of the Jordan River. And now their leaders passed away, so they don't know what to do. They know that God has given them this promised land that's over the Jordan River, that he's gifted to them, but who is going to lead them there, right? The whole nation is kind of scared of what's going to happen. How are we going to fulfill these promises that God's given us? Who's going to lead us? And then we're introduced to Joshua. Joshua is this man who's been Moses' aide for a long time, second in command. He knows Moses. And so in the midst of his grief of losing his mentor, the man who's taught him everything he knows, he has these questions too about how am I supposed to lead this people? Am I the one supposed to lead these people? I don't know what's going on. And in all the midst of this fear that is coming upon him, there's a voice that comes to him. And it says in verse 2, look with me in verse 2 of Joshua 1, Moses, my servant, is dead. This is the word, the voice of God. Now you and all the people prepare to cross over the Jordan River to the land I am giving the Israelites. Okay, well, one, Joshua is extremely frightened because he's never heard the voice of God. He's only heard it described to him from Moses. And now God's telling him to go. What? To go into the promised land. To cross the Jordan. And so that, even to us, that looks just like simple words. But to Joshua, as he's sitting in the camp outside of the Jordan River, he hears the rushing river of the Jordan River that's running through a mountainside with steep banks on either side and is more than 100 feet deep. And he goes, God, wait, you want me to lead this entire nation over the Jordan River? Like, that's crazy. It's crazy. And then God follows it up and said, I'm giving you the land. And in the land to Joshua is something that is really bittersweet to him because it's something that he has always heard about his entire life, ever since he was a little kid, that God's promised you a home. He's never experienced a land of his own before. He's always been traveling along with everybody else in this entire nation of Israel he's been with. And he's grown up hearing stories of God promising them this land. and he's never experienced it before. And so there's this mix of emotions here for Joshua as he hears God say, cross the Jordan River. Okay, that's crazy, but I'm also giving you that land. That's awesome, but are you sure, God? And then God follows it up, not giving time Joshua to ask questions, says, I've given you every place where the sole of your foot treads, just as I promised Moses. So God looks at Joshua and says, I'm commanding you to bring the people over the river, and I'm going to give them the land that I've promised them. I'm also fulfilling the promises that I gave to Moses. Nothing's changed. Nothing has changed about what I said is going to happen. Then he describes the territory that he's going to take over, that Joshua is going to lead the people into. Your territory will be from the wilderness in Lebanon to the great river, the Euphrates River, and all the land of the Hittites and west of the Mediterranean Sea. Right, describing what we know today as the nation of Israel. It's a great and vast land. And Joshua's like, are you sure, God? Like, he's describing the land that he's going to give the Israelites out of his goodness. Not because of what Israel's done, but because God is giving them the land. Joshua is still confused here. This is still a really weighty task of going over, crossing the Jordan River and fulfilling the promises God's given. How am I supposed to do that? Because there's people still in that land. We're going to have to conquer it. Like, how am I supposed to do that? It's incredibly scary to see all the factors about inheriting this land that God is giving Joshua. And God, again, doesn't even give Joshua time to ask questions. It says, no one will be able to stand against you as long as you live. Why? I will be with you just as Moses. I will not leave you or abandon you. Joshua's taken aback a little bit and realizes this assurance that God is giving him that he will be with him is a big deal. He thinks back to the times that he was with Moses and realizes all the stories of God's faithfulness that has come through. Never has his people gone hungry. Never have they been taken over when they've been following God, because he was with them then as Moses was the leader. Now God's promising Joshua that I'm going to be with you the same that I was with Moses. Right? And then we come to like a command, another charge, the action of what Joshua is supposed to do here in verse 6. Be strong and courageous, for you will distribute the land I swore to their fathers and give them the inheritance. Give them as an inheritance. So God calls Joshua after this, calling him to lead the people of the Jordan River into their land, and he goes, I know it's scary, but be strong, be courageous, for I am with you. I am with you. Ooh. And Joshua's like, I get that. I understand. I know the stories. I've been with Moses for long, but how do I know you? How do I make sure I'm on the straight path? And God again says in verse 7, above all, be very strong and courageous to observe carefully the whole instruction my servant Moses commanded you. So remember what Moses taught you, but then do not turn from it to the right or the left, so that you will have success wherever you will go. The teaching that Moses has given you, Joshua, is enough. I've given you that. That is going to guide you into leading the people, because Moses has taught you about me. And then in verse 8, we see another piece of guidance God gives Joshua to be strong and courageous. This book of instruction must not depart from your mouth. You are to meditate on it day and night, so that you may carefully observe everything written in it. For then you will prosper and succeed in whatever you do. God is telling Joshua, I'm giving you this task of leadership, of leading the people, my people, over the land to inherit the land that I've promised them for generations, ever since Abraham. You remain faithful to me because I'm remaining faithful to you. You do that by staying in my word, by being one with it, meditating on it. Some commentators said that's a low murmur of just always speaking the word, always being in it. And it says the law, and our minds automatically jump to like all the Levitical laws, right? And everything that is instructed to do to live a good life. However, that's not what that means. To Joshua, that would have meant the book of the law, the instructions God had given him, is all that he knows about God and how to live in God's promises and the promises God's made to them. It's a reminder of who God is. And God tells Joshua, if you remain in that, if you remember who I am, continue to grow in who I am, and remember what I've told you, things will go well for you. And it's your job to lead the people and continue to remind them of my faithfulness. To be strong and courageous because of my faithfulness. And we see in verse 9, haven't I commanded you, be strong and courageous, don't be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Again, God reiterates the main point here. Be strong and courageous. God knows he's telling Joshua to do some crazy things, some big things, things that we've been waiting generations for. And he tells Joshua, you know what? Don't worry about it. I got it. Be strong. Follow me, and the people will follow you. And I will be with you wherever you go. Don't be afraid. I'm with you. And then God stopped speaking. He said enough. Joshua's sitting there slowly taking everything in. What does he do with that? That's a lot of weight in just 9 verses. A lot of weight. Then we see Joshua, what he hears. Like we see what he's fully internalized. And then we see in verse 10 his response. And it's not with words, but it's with action. In verse 10, then Joshua commanded the officers of the people, go through the camp and tell the people, get provisions ready for yourselves, for within 3 days you will be crossing the Jordan to go and take the possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you to inherit. Joshua hears the words of be strong and courageous because of my faithfulness. I'm with you. He believes that and turns that into action and goes to the people who are still questioning, fearful of what are we going to do next? And he goes, you know what, guys? Let's go. God is telling us to go. We've been waiting for this all of our lives, and he's telling us to go. Joshua acts boldly, knowing what God has told him. And he tells them, hey, get your provisions ready. Right? The land is already ours. We don't have to do anything. We just need to go. God is telling us this is what we've been waiting for years, generations. Let's go. But then Joshua looks over to what's known as the Transjordan tribes. They've been gifted land that's on the other side of the Jordan River. And these are identified as the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. And so Moses has given these 2.5 tribes land on the other side of the Jordan River, and so they're already settled, right? And we can see that in Numbers 32 and Deuteronomy 3. So they're settled, they're there, they have found their rest that God has promised them. They have a home, right? But Moses said, you still have to fulfill your promises of being a unified tribe of Israel, 12 tribes of Israel, and help your brothers out when we go take the land. Right? That's what Moses said. Right? So now Joshua again acts boldly by going to them. They have no reason to believe him. They only promised this to Moses, right? So to our human minds, it's really easy. Like, oh no, you're a new leader. We don't have to do that, right? But Joshua acts boldly and goes to them and says, remember what Moses, the Lord's servant, so he uses the authority of Moses and the Lord, commanded you when he said, the Lord your God will give you rest, and he will give you this land. Your wives and dependents and livestock may remain in the land Moses gave you this side of the Jordan, but your best soldiers must cross in battle formation ahead of your brothers and help them until the Lord your Lord gives your brothers rest as he has given you, and they too may possess the land the Lord your God is giving them. You may return to the land of your inheritance and take possession of what Moses, the Lord's servant, gave you on the east side of the Jordan River. Okay, that's a really long statement, but to me it feels different because there's not much diplomacy here. It's just Joshua being very matter of fact, saying, hey, God and the Lord, Moses both gave you this promise. They've given you this land. Hey, I'm in charge now. Come on, let's fulfill this. Right? And to me, that what's left out is the passion, the conviction that Joshua is going to them with and saying, guys, I am following the Lord. He's being strong and courageous and acting with conviction that the Lord has told them to do this and that they need to follow. He puts himself out there, and what's their answer? And they answer Joshua, everything you have commanded us, we will do, and everywhere you will send us, we will go. Okay, they hear him. They say, yes, we will go with you. We believe you. We are going to fill the promises that we gave to God the way that he's fulfilling the promises he given to us. We will obey you just as we obeyed Moses in everything. Certainly, the Lord your God will be with you as he was with Moses. Right? There's even an encouragement here of them saying, we will go with you. We will obey you and be as faithful as we was with Moses because we know that you are with God. Right? You are following God. You are living in the way that you're leading us, in the way that he desires us to be led. And then the Reubenites, Gadites, and half-tribe of Manasseh push even further and say, anyone who rebels against your order and does not obey your words and all that you command them will be put to death. Above all, be strong and courageous. Okay? For us New Testament readers, for the Christian, that seems surprising because very rarely does Israel ever fully obey God, right? But they say, Joshua, we believe you. We believe that God is leading you. We see your bravery, the courageousness that you have. And anyone who doesn't follow you or believe you or listen to your words, you know what? They're going to die because the way of God is the right way. And then they even encourage him again with God's words himself. Be strong and courageous. And then the people start moving. And we see through the rest of the book of Joshua how God leads them into the land and they take it. The beginning here, we see it starts out with a place of fear, of not knowing what's going on. And God installing a new leadership with Joshua and calling him to be strong and courageous, not because of Joshua's own strengths, but because of God's faithfulness and his promises. Right? That's the big idea here. Right? Be strong and courageous because of God's faithfulness. And act. Right? So you may be just sitting there with me and wondering, okay, like, so what? Right? So what? What do I do with this? Right? And I think we go back to the beginning of the story and seeing how this fear is building up of not knowing, being uncertain. And as we saw earlier, we all feel fear, right? It's wired into an emotion that we naturally feel. Right? But what do we do with that? Do we cower away or do we act in courageousness because of God's faithfulness? Right? And so we see Joshua acting on that and giving us an example of how to do that in several ways. One, he gives us, Joshua reflects, right? He's reminded of the ways that God was with Moses and was with him. He's reminded of the past and helps him calm the fear that's found in the future. And so maybe you're sitting there today and thinking, man, there's a lot of scary situations in my brain, right? A lot of scary situations in the future. I don't know how it's going to turn out. I want to encourage you to pause and reflect upon what God has done in your life. I know for me, he's led me through a lot of different things, and it's really easy to forget all of those and to be caught up in the moment, to get things really small and just start shaking in fear of not knowing what's going to happen. But then I'm reminded of the ways that God's been there for me. And it took me a while to be able to get good at this, but one of the ways that for me, and this was done through the encouragement of a lot of pastors and mentors, is to have a journal. To have a journal, right? Write down all of the fears that you're facing, all the things that are going on, and then you can look back and see how God was faithful, right? That's what Joshua has done through is when he sees that God is giving him, just as I was with Moses, all of these stories come back. But then we also see God telling Joshua to stay in the Word, right? We are reminded of the way of God's promises that we forget in the midst of our fear because of His Word. By being in His Word, by being in His promises here, of knowing who God is, we are able to calm the fear by knowing God's promises and who He is and what He's giving to us, right? Joshua, by being strong and courageous, commits himself to knowing who God is, knowing who God, what He's promised us, Him, and he acts upon that, right? He understands that it's fully metabolized and he acts upon that, right? And we get the same command with us in the New Testament too, because we get a little bit more than Joshua. See, Joshua is still very much in the beginning of the Bible here, but now we have the rest of the New Testament and all the promises that God fulfills in there as well. So we have more promises, more evidence of what God has been doing. And even Joshua himself. So as you're facing your own fears of these questions about God's calling me to a lot of things and I don't know what to do about it, get into His Word, reflect on the way that He's been there for you, and get into His Word. Remember what His promises are, that He is never going to leave nor forsake you, as we see Him reiterate again in Matthew 28. For I'm with you to the very end of the age. God calls us to be strong and courageous because of who He is, because He is with us. Because it's not us fulfilling the promises, it's Him. And so in the midst of our fears, we need to reflect upon what God has done. We need to remain in His promises. And over time, those fears, at a time and experience of fear, will be lessened and lessened. As we build up experience and knowledge of who God is in the midst of fear, we can act more courageously and bravely than ever before. And what's beautiful is this is the way that God's designed us to do it as well. We see with research and psychology that there's this little spot of brain cells in your brain called the amygdala, and it houses all your memory. And it's pretty lazy because it will go to the memory that's the largest, the biggest, that fast. And so what we see is that whatever memories happen the most, right? If I go in and I see a tiger and it almost eats me, I'm going to be scared of tigers for the rest of my life, right? Until I go to the zoo over and over and over again, and I realize that tiger's behind a glass. I don't have to be scared of it. I don't have to run away. God's designed us to experience fear, but then to also to act upon it based on our past experiences. And so that's why he's given us his word and our ability to reflect, because he knows fear is going to come. He knows that things are going to be crazy and we're going to doubt sometimes. But he's giving us ways to build up our memory bank of knowing who he is, so that when we feel that fear, the first response, the first memories that come to mind is not how we failed, but how he was with us in those moments. And that gives us the strength to face whatever tigers, right? Or whatever things, whatever fears may be coming. That gives us the strength to move forward and act in the way that God desires, to be strong and courageous in his faithfulness. And that gives us hope in the midst of fear. Right? To be strong and courageous in the midst of faithfulness, God's faithfulness, as he's displayed through Joshua, and Joshua acting upon that and leading the nation of Israel into God's promised land, the land that he gifted them, and that he promised them. Joshua overcame that fear because of God's promises, and he calls us to do the same. And so there might be two responses here as we kind of just sit here with this. One is that you may already be following God, and you'd be like, man, I need to remember and take reflection on what God has done in the midst of all this chaos I'm feeling. So I want to encourage you, reflect, right? Get into his word. Take time to journal about this, your story, about how God's been there with you. But then you also may be sitting there like, man, my life is already chaotic, but I've never done it with God. He desires a relationship with you. That's what the promise of the land was all about, is God desiring the people to have a home so he can dwell with them. Okay? And then we see the rest of the story here of God desiring a relationship with you. So as if you're sitting there in the midst of your fears, in the chaos, you need an anchor to hold on to be courageous with. I want you to come up front. I want to be able to pray with you and share with you what a relationship with Jesus Christ is like. Let's pray. So, Father God, I thank you for this story. I thank you for just the ways that you've been faithful in my life and the life of the people here. And we thank you for just the example that Joshua gives us of acting strong and courageous. But most of all, your promises of never abandoning us when we're faithful to you. Lord, I pray as we go throughout our days and our weeks that we are reminded of who you are. Amen. I pray.